Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. Joseph had been sold into slavery by 10 of his big brothers at the age of 17. And God guided and directed his life through many escapades. And he now has come to the age of 37. And he has guided Egypt. He's the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And for 7 years he has guided Egypt in storing enough grain over those 7 years to deal with 7 further years of great famine in the whole wide area. He certainly lived a very pressurized life. He was the man in charge. Pharaoh had given him full control in Egypt, except for the throne that Pharaoh sat on. He lived a very high pressure life. But in our passage today, we notice that after 20 years, who is standing in front of him? The 10 brothers who sold him into slavery. Can you imagine the thoughts that must have been spinning through his brain? He wasn't expecting this. The brothers as well, they came into Egypt to buy grain. They had no idea what had happened to Joseph. He could have been anywhere. He could probably have been dead. But they didn't recognize. It's beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful. But Joseph recognized them. And I wonder just what his thoughts were. Pressure. And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. As we read this passage, this wonderful chapter in Genesis, we do think initially that he's out to get them. If that was you, had been treated so badly, sent into slavery for just being a good brother, for being a good son to his father, you can understand that he might have been out for vengeance against the boys. What pressure he was under. You see, as we face times of great trial, when we're put under it happens to us all on occasion, that things come into our life that puts us under real pressure. How do we deal with that? The Lord's brother tells us in James 1 and 12, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. We keep going. We keep going to the end. So first of all, notice in our passage, Joseph meets his brothers. When Joseph learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said to them, behold, I have heard that there's grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die. Joseph's family learned that there were vital supplies in Egypt. Canaan was suffering from the famine that the whole wider area was suffering from. But you'll notice that in verse 5, the famine was also in the land of Canaan, the promised land. They were now going to go through 7 years, along with Egypt, of this great famine. But when we read the passage, the first few verses of the chapter, you see a pretty pathetic family. They're all standing there, their arms the same length, and they've no idea. They're going to die unless they get food. Where are they going to get food? And they're all, whenever you look in the second part of verse 1, Jacob, the father, turns to the 10 boys, 11 sons. Why do you look at one another? Do you know what I mean? Your arms the same length. What are you going to do about it? Big strapping sons of mine. What are you going to do? And of course they have no idea. With all the infighting and cruelty among them, they were paralyzed. Paralyzed. They hadn't a lulu. They didn't know what to do. So, You see, they were in a real crisis. And it is true that in times of crises, families do tend to come together. Every family has a problem child, yes? In fact, some families have more than one problem child. But it is true that whenever a crisis comes into a family, families normally come together to help each other through the crisis. That's family life. And that's what all families are like. So here, finally, Jacob, Abraham's grandson, Joseph's father, took the lead and galvanized his sons, finally, into action. Verse 2, Jacob says to the sons, "Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. At long last, and this is beautiful. Do you remember the two dreams that Joseph had? Do you remember? And he was really treated very, very badly by the whole family over these two dreams. Yes. But we see the two dreams coming to fruition. We read, Joseph's brothers came down, and what did they do? Notice in verse 6, Joseph's brothers come down, and what did they do? They bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Okay. What a lovely moment. And Joseph recognized, of course, the fact that here were his brothers bowed down with their faces to the ground before him. Joseph, of course, they didn't realize. They didn't recognize him because he looked like an Egyptian who would have been dressed, and he wouldn't have had a big Jewish beard and all the rest, a Hebrew beard. Yeah, he would have looked totally different. And of course, he was 20 years older. I mean, 20 years can make a big difference. And we all have you ever looked at photographs of yourself from 20 years ago? Yes. Anyway, so they didn't reckon, but there they were, the dreams that they had castigated. Yes, remember they were so incredibly jealous over Joseph. There they are with their faces to the ground. They recognized that they were in serious trouble. Here Joseph's accusing them of being spies. So the brothers try to say to Joseph, unbeknown, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. They didn't know they were talking to Joseph. "We are your servants, our 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." And of course, that was Joseph that they're actually talking to. But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies." Now that means certain death. If Joseph could prove, which of course he knew, but if he could prove, and they knew this, if he could prove that they were spies indeed, they'd come just to spy out the land, then they'd go back home and bring armies in against Egypt at this difficult time. They said, "We are honest men." And I can just hear Joseph, that's about right. Yeah, honest men. Joseph, we must remember, isn't being vindictive here. He's not trying to get at his brother. He puts them in jail for 3 days. That gives them time to think about their situation, but it also gives Joseph time to think about what he should do. What would be the right thing? Can he trust him? The brothers' last sight of Joseph was disgraceful, sold him. But also you remember the problem they had with their father. They went to their father with a multicolored coat, do you remember? And they splashed animals' blood on it. And they came to Jacob and said, "Is this your son's coat that you made for him?" Yes. He's obviously been killed by a wild animal. There's Joseph standing in front of them. They had a lot to answer for. You see, the brothers' last sight was him as a slave. And the very mention of going down to Egypt, where they had sold Joseph, they had no idea what had happened. Who knew what was in front of them? They had no idea. The atmosphere at this meeting was very, very tense. Brothers were afraid for their lives. And Joseph needed to test his brothers, their honesty. Just where were they in regarding the awful sins that they had committed? Joseph meets his brothers. Secondly, Joseph's brothers are tested. In verse 19, if you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me. Joseph tests his brothers were very important for God's plan. You remember, we know the end of the story, of course, but God's plan was to bring Jacob's family into Egypt, and there this family would grow into the nation of Israel. But God needed this immediate family as the nucleus of Israel. He needed this family to be with him. They needed them to be faithful to him, their God. So Joseph was going to test them to make sure that they were now repentant, that they had made up for the sin. They had apologized for their sin. The brothers needed to be tested. Verse 20, bring your youngest brother to me. Now the brothers knew, of course, 10 boys knew that this was impossible. Jacob was not going to let Benjamin come. We remember, of course, that Joseph and Benjamin were the sons of Jacob's one true love, the girl that he loved beyond anything else, Rachel. And Rachel gave him 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, and he loved them because they were the sons of his one true love, Rachel. But one of them's dead, so he thinks. And then the brothers who came back having found Joseph dead, they want to take Benjamin, the last of Rachel's sons. They want to take him to Egypt with them. He said, oh, watch my lips. No. So the brothers said, well, this can't happen. So on the 3rd day, verse 18, the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. Isn't that amazing? This Egyptian leader, the brothers call him the man, and he was indeed the man. He was the one in charge. And he says that he will let them go, but he will keep one brother, Simeon, so that whenever they go back home with the grain and come back again with Benjamin, then Joseph will release Simeon to them, if they are honest men. So finally the brothers admit to each other their excesses, this awful sin that they had committed. Verse 21, then they said to one another, in truth we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon. Finally, the penny drops. Finally, they see that they must deal with their God. They must deal with God. It is God that is bringing this on them. What a test. Take the grain home, bring back Benjamin. Brothers just didn't see that would happen. So the 9 brothers packed up the grain and headed for home. And of course, the Holy Spirit tells a wonderful yarn, and it's so true, that one of the brothers on the way, they stop off for a night's rest, and he opens up the bag of grain to feed his donkey. And there's all the money that he paid for the grain. Can you imagine the fear that struck into his heart? This is dead zone. You know, no matter what happens, I've had it. Here's my money. I'm going to be accused not of being a spy. I'm going to be accused of being a thief. So they head home to their father. Joseph meets his brothers. Joseph's brothers are tested, and finally Jacob's sorrows increase. Verse 29, when they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me. Poor old man. He was in dire straits. What was going to happen? It's strange, of course, in the story that it was only one brother, we don't know which one, had opened the sack, but none of the rest of them opened their sacks until they got into Canaan. And of course the fear spread among them as they emptied their sacks. Verse 35, behold, every man's bundle of money was in the sack. The man, that's what's going to happen to them when they meet the man, if they ever met him. So when they came to Jacob, their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened. They told him most. Didn't really explain the atmosphere because they had left Simeon in a very tense atmosphere. So basically, they told Jacob the truth, which was strange for them to be so honest. And we see a great difference here with the way that they report what's happening with Simeon to what they reported about Joseph. And it's really interesting that whenever they reported the death of Joseph, with the bloodied coat and all the rest of it, Jacob believed them. Isn't that wonderful? Amazing. He believed them. But whenever they're reporting that Simeon's okay, Simeon's safe, we take back Benjamin with us, he'll release Simeon. But Jacob thinks this is a bit dodgy. He finds it difficult to believe. So he says, I'm not going to send Benjamin. It's your fault. It's up to you. You see, we see a great difference in Jacob's attitude now to his sons, now that Simeon. It's interesting when the brothers presented the twisted account of Joseph's death, Jacob believed them. Verse 36, and Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simeon's no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me. Now we can understand exactly how Jacob is feeling. This is dire straits. Big decisions have to be made. But he's adamant. And it's the same as all of us. Whenever we get into something that's really put us under pressure, something has to be said. Whenever something goes against us, our normal attitude, I'm finished with it. I'm not doing it anymore. Yes? We use hyperbole. We use really, what's the word I want? Exaggeration. Great exaggeration. Hyperbole. That I'm not speaking to him again. I'm not going to the club again. I don't care what you say, right? And so it's hyperbole because he didn't mean it. Because it was going to have to be sorted out eventually. You see, we notice here in Jacob's troubles coming out. Bereaved, my children's not true. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. It's not true. All this has come against me. It's all not true. But you notice in everything Jacob says, he doesn't mention God. Yeah, he doesn't mention God. It's just he's overcome with emotion about no Joseph, no Simeon, and they want to take Benjamin. It doesn't make sense to Joseph. But he doesn't remember that God has always been with him. Throughout his life, Jacob's life, God has always been there. God had caused him to prosper during the 20 years that he was working for Uncle Laban. Do you remember that time? And then God blessed him after, remember the night of fighting at Peniel? And then God had protected him in his meeting with his brother Esau. Really tense escapades in his life, incidents. But God was with him and brought him through it. And we didn't think that God is in this somehow. God is in this. I am trusting him. Psalm 34:19. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. Time's gone. Joseph meets his brothers. Joseph's brothers are tested. Jacob's sorrows increase. The 11 brothers and their father have now to face two big decisions. One, do they return to Egypt to buy more grain, or do they stay in Canaan and die of hunger? Big decision. Two, will Jacob allow them to take Benjamin with them? That's a big decision to obtain the release of Simeon. Or will they not go and let Simeon die in Egypt? Big decisions. What are they going to do? In our life, we have big decisions to make. We don't pretend that it's easy to make the big decisions. We'll talk to a Christian friend. We'll talk to a close family friend. We'll read a book about it. But then finally, there's only one way to deal with big pressures in life. Again, James, Lord's brother, says 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. There's only one answer whenever pressure comes into our life, and that's to ask God. Now, before we come to the table, we're going to sing again.